Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, The Art of Cultural Change, Making Change Stick. Today's webinar is part of our free lunch webinar series, and this is a series of topics around IT transformation and the three main pillars of that transformation, at least from our perspective, which are cultural change, organizational effectiveness, and driving business value. These are highly focused 30-minute discussions exploring these topics, and we hope you find them of value. So again, thank you for joining us today. And while we know there's no such thing as a free lunch in life, there is, at least for two of you today, as our way of saying thank you for joining today's webinar. Two of you will be selected at random to receive a free gift card to TGI Fridays to have lunch on us. And then our last housekeeping item is that if you're interested in the deck that we are presenting today, it is available in the presentation download section at the bottom left of your screen, and you're able to download that there. So with that, let's get into today's webinar, The Art of Cultural Change, Making Change Stick. Whenever we talk about IT transformation or process improvement initiatives or IT service management or any of those, take your pick, we talk a lot about people, process, and technology. And we always talk about them as if they're, kind of equal and all the same parts of the same whole and all that. But I guess it's always kind of brought us to this question, and that is that, which one of these is really most important, or is one of them most important? If you know anything about who we are, you probably have a good idea that we have an opinion about this, and here's our belief. Our belief is very simply that it's people that are the most important part of this process, and that's because we believe it's people that use the process and the technology to meet the needs of the business. And so without the people, you can have a tremendous process or a great tool, but if the people aren't using it effectively, they aren't embracing it, then it's really not going to achieve the impact that you want. And so, therefore, if you're going to have the impact that you would like to have, the impact that you intend from this change, that you must focus on those people and you must change their behavior to make it happen. In scientific circles, this concept is called the last mile. And it's driven from well, I guess we're not alone in IT, that this is a common issue. And really it has to do with the fact that you invest all this energy and resources and capital in building a solution, and that solution typically involves kind of a technology and a process or some combination. But if we don't finish that last mile, if we don't focus on changing people and individual and organizational behavior, we end up building bridges that look a lot like the one that you see on the screen right now. And that is it's this magnificent testimony to technology and the development, but we haven't quite got there. We can see where we're trying to get to, but as we drive our car down this road, we end up falling right into the water because we haven't finished it. We haven't made that last mile that actually connects everything that we've built with the people and with the ability to actually make it a reality. And so it's important, though, as we look at this, that we really have to understand how we cover this last mile and what we do. And as we're doing that, we have to recognize that fundamentally, this isn't an IT problem. It's not really even a cultural problem or anything that's unique to your organization or any organization. This is fundamentally a human problem. As humans, we prefer the pain of what we know to the fear of what we don't. And so there's this natural resistance to change inside all of us. And so if you're going to affect behavior, if you're going to actually have that lasting impact that you'd like to have, you need to take deliberate action to change individual and organizational behavior in a way that achieves the outcome you're going to achieve. So even though we're talking about IT transformation today, and everything here is extremely relevant, I want to use an example that is not IT, that's not really anything to do with where we live and breathe every day, to hopefully bring this idea home. And so the example we're going to use is actually a health problem that India discovered actually 50 years ago. In 1960, the child mortality rate in India from diarrhea was 24%. So nearly a quarter of all children were dying every year from diarrhea. Now that's a staggering number. And so as you can imagine, they put together a team of people, really an international group of people, to try to solve this problem. And what they found was that the solution was actually very simple. That the situation that they were encountering was that the children would lose water. They would simply get dehydrated. And that's what was causing the problems that would lead to death in many cases. And so the solution was simply rehydration salts, these little drops that allowed the children to retain water and to absorb water, and would solve this problem. And so as a result today, 6.5, the child mortality rate has dropped to 6.5%. Now that's a significant improvement, a tremendous testimony to the work they've done. But if we put this in real numbers, that means that there's still 400,000 children dying in India each year today. And so it begs the question, why? Why are 400,000 children dying for what is to most of us a mere nuisance, just a trivial kind of issue? Yet here we have the significant impact. And so if you were looking at this and trying to get to a root cause, you might say, well, maybe it's the technology. It doesn't really work all the time. Well, that isn't the case. The rehydration salts are safe, they are effective, and they're available. They've figured out how to manufacture them in high quantities. The technology is there. Well, so maybe say it's the process. Maybe it's like we've got the solution, but we can't get it to everybody. Well, that's not true either. That the distribution of this is extremely wide. It's highly accessible. It's available in almost every corner of India. And the cost is either free or virtually free. So the technology is there. The process is there. But today there's still 400,000 deaths. Why? What's causing that? Well, you can probably see where this is going. And as we bring this back to an IT perspective, or to make it relate to IT, is that we see this a lot happening with IT initiatives, is that the technology is developed, the process gets implemented, but we find exactly what they found. And that is that if they fail to actually change the behaviors, the attitudes, the habits, and the beliefs, then nothing actually changes, or at least for some of this population, it didn't change. And so you can't completely solve this problem if you don't address the attitudes, behaviors, habits, and beliefs of the people. And in this case, researchers did a study. They went out to particularly some of the remote villages, and what they found was that when they asked the question, if your child has diarrhea, should you do nothing? Should you give them more water? Should you give them less? And nearly 50% in some cases would say they would give them less water. So the exact opposite behavior, what they should have been doing, they were doing, and it was based not out of any malcontent. They weren't trying to harm their child. It was simply their belief system, their habits, what the culture that they were within. That is what was the norm. And so how do you solve this? Well, they came up with this very simple idea of community mobilization. And the idea of community mobilization is that they would go into these villages, into these areas, and identify the leaders, identify the people that were influencers, that the community was already looking to for answers. And they would focus their energy on them. They would invest in them. They would make sure they understood the magnitude of the problem, of how simple the solution was, how they could apply the solution, how they needed to work with mothers when their children got sick. They then brought in a bunch of resources to support them, training, workshops, modeling behavior, a bunch of things to try to bring this out. But it was really this key that they had to build these changes to the belief structures from the inside out. They couldn't try to force it from the outside. It wasn't going to work. And so this is an idea that we need to apply from an IT perspective, because we see this all the time, where technology is developed, process is there, but we haven't really changed personal or organizational behavior, and so therefore we don't receive or achieve the outcomes and the benefits that we hope to. So I want to talk a little bit about an organization that actually is doing a lot of work in this area, that they're taking a very deliberate approach to changing behavior. And this is this applies in the context of them bringing some people on board, or when they onboard people onto their team. But I want to walk you through it. So briefly, when they start, they do a bunch of role playing just in general through all of this, as they spend a lot of time going through this process and using this role playing as a means to communicate the cultural aspects that they're trying to share and embody. They then have a 4-hour general training session whenever someone kind of joins the team, and this session is focused exclusively on culture, on what it is that they're all about, and how they treat their customers and how they do this. They then spend the next 2 to 4 weeks, while they're getting trained on specific functions, reinforcing this, and they're doing certification. So while they're on the job, they're getting the specific training. But again, this training is, yes, it's about the technical type aspects of their whatever their function that they're being trained on, but it's also about how to do that in context of how they interact and what behaviors they are expected to perform, or how they're supposed to act. And so In addition to that, then they give them more options, and the certification is an interesting and key part of this, because the certification means it's not just stepping through and going through the process. It's demonstrating that you get it. It's demonstrating that you understand the behavior that is supposed to be embodied here and that you're going to apply it. But this organization also recognizes that it's not enough to simply do that and have a handful of people that kind of own this culture. They recognized that they had to identify the people that really got it, that really understood what was going on here, and encourage them and put them out into the organization and embed this culture very deeply within the fabric. And so for them, they give them a whole nother round of leadership development support. So they get them certified as a master in an area of specialty so that they establish that credibility with the folks doing this work. They have them read the book called Mastery, The Keys to Success and Long-Term Fulfillment, which talks about how you bring this into your character. They then have a 3-day course that they send them to on communication and leadership. I mean, how key is this, right? It's not about the technical aspects of the job. It's about communication and leadership, key attributes that you need to have if you're going to perpetuate a culture. And then my favorite is that they give them this passport, and they have, I think it's about 2 weeks to go through, and they have to identify 30 specific behaviors that are being modeled, and they have 2 ways. They have to model them themselves, have somebody else notice them and write down, oh, I saw that you were acting this way. Or they have to see it being modeled in somebody else, and they're going to write it down. And so it's just this really deliberate process to take the attributes of their culture, the behavior they're expecting their people to follow, and embed it into the organization. And so when we give this live, I always ask a question, anyone want to guess who this is, what organization this is? And the guesses are always Microsoft or GE. Those are all great guesses, but you'd probably be surprised about the answer. Would you believe that the organization I'm talking about is actually Nick's Pizza and Pub out of Chicago? And they've had a tremendous impact in this way, because while they are just a mere pizza parlor, I guess, do we still have pizza parlors? But a pizza store, pizza restaurant, they are twice as profitable as the industry average. Wildly successful in that regard. But most importantly, they also have 5 times less the employee turnover rate, which is in an industry that's notorious for high turnover. They keep their employees. Their employees want to be there, want to be a part of it. And a lot of that is based on the fact that their customers love them. They are the pillar of the community, and their customers flock to the store and just kind of embrace everything they are. And it all emanates from this culture that they've embedded. And so it caused me to question, well, which is more complex, really? Is it pizza or is it IT? And if it's IT, which I think we all think it is, then if this pizza station if this pizza restaurant is able to do this and achieve that kind of result, how much more powerful is it in the context of what we all do? And so my question for you and my challenge is really, what are you going to do to change organizational behavior within your organization, and so that you can make these processes and the technology take root? That's really what it's about. How are you going to actually embed these changes, this better way of doing things, into your culture? As you might imagine, we have a few suggestions for you. So we're going to step through some of those today. And I apologize, the one downside to the 30-minute format is there's a lot of stuff here that we're not going to get into a lot of detail, but we wanted to at least give you an understanding of what this is. And the most important thing, frankly, is this combination, and it's important that you understand both. It's to lead, but also, and probably most importantly, create leaders. That as you're trying to embed this into your culture, just like Nick's Pizza and Pub does, they identify those thought leaders, just like the idea of community mobilization, they identify the influencers. You need to be identifying the people within your organization that have the ability to lead and build them up, because they will go deep into your organization and spread the message of the change you're trying to make far and wide. And they will be the primary point that all this starts building around. And so your focus has to be on building leaders. Now, you have to lead effectively to do that, but this is not about a top-down. You have to go and embed this by building leaders and really have a focus on building those people up. And that really leads us to the second point, and that is, this isn't about building process, right? One of the big downfalls we see in service management efforts is that they start with a bunch of people getting in a room, locked in a conference room someplace with a whiteboard, and they start writing out the process. When we step people through our methodology, the process is almost the last thing that occurs. And the reason is that the most important thing is that you're trying to build a team. You're trying to build a team that buys into the change you're making, that gets it, that understand what's going on. They become these leaders. They're the ones that go out into your organization and are spreading the news of what this is and why it's important. And so if you build that team, then all the rest can come. But if you start with the process, then you have a disaffected team, and they're not there, right? So you've got to put your focus and your energy on building the team. And then once you have that team, they've got to be empowered. They've got to be able to make decisions and know and believe that they can really affect change. One of the challenges that we also see, particularly when people decide they're going to quote-unquote implement IDLE, is that they end up trying to take this very rigid structure of a by-the-book approach. And what the biggest problem with that is it actually takes all the decision-making ability and all the ability to be creative and to experiment out of the hands of the team, because, oh, well, IDLE says this, and so we're going to go do that. We have a saying when we work with our clients, and that is that it is better to have a team build a really poor process, one that we may think is going to fail, but for them to have bought into it, believe in it, and to be committed to fixing it if it doesn't work, than to have a great process that is perfect, that nobody buys into and nobody believes. Because the important thing is that you're creating an organization that owns this and is going to be invested in making sure that it succeeds and that it works. And so it is critical that this team has the ability to even make those mistakes and to make those bad decisions if that's what happens, because it's what leads them down this road. And that really comes down, we can kind of sum this whole thing up with this last line here, which is, if they, your team, if they don't believe it, no one will. This whole thing has to start with your team's ability to sell this, to spread the excitement, the energy, the power of what's coming. So as we talked about that, there are 4 steps that we have to an adoption strategy that kind of embody everything we talked about here. And we're not going to be able to get to these in a lot of detail, but I want to at least touch on all of them. The first is that you have to build awareness. And whenever we say this, we always kind of get these nods and smiles like, of course we're going to do awareness. Well, we'll send the email. Everyone's going to know this is starting. Well, when we say awareness, it's more like Hollywood buzz. This is more like when a movie gets opened, or rather before open, when they're planning it. I mean, if you have a big blockbuster, there are times where you will see the first ad showing up on the movie screen in previews 2 years before that movie hits the screen, right? The world will end 2012, and you don't know what the movie's about, but you know it's out there, and it starts building this buzz and this excitement, and they give you a little bit more, and by the time that movie shows up, you're ready for it. That's what we're talking about here. You've got to build buzz, you've got to build excitement. People have to know that it's coming, and that it's important and it's big. And IT organizations sometimes shy away from this because it requires commitment, and they're afraid to overcommit and not be able to deliver. Well, let me tell you, you have to commit. You have to be stepping out and boldly say, this is what we're here to achieve. Now, you can keep it at that, world will end. It can be somewhat broad and high level at the beginning, and that's okay. But you have to step out and build that buzz and build that excitement. The second thing is and these are basically kind of in order, is you have to create involvement. And this is extremely early on in the cycle, that you need to engage people from across the enterprise in what's going on. And there's really 2 purposes here. The first is you're going to get really good feedback. You're going to understand that how the things you're working on are going to work or not, right? And because it's going to allow you to get, whether it's focus groups or town halls or whatever you're doing, you're going to talk about these things, and you're going to talk about them in their unfinished state. And again, IT people can get very uncomfortable with this. But you've got to do that and kind of just wear it out on your sleeve and be okay with it, because that's how you get that input. And you're going to learn a lot of things that would have not worked if you just rolled them out without asking anybody and without kind of sharing this. And it's not about selling them at this stage. It's about getting genuine feedback. Here's the second thing, though. Even if the feedback you get is everything you already thought about, or it's just outright resistance, oh, well, that'll never work because of this or that, you're going to get an education in where the resistance points to that future change are going to be. And it will give you the knowledge that you need to figure out how to combat that resistance. And the last thing is that involvement, by getting people engaged, creates engagement, it creates investment, right? And it's kind of, again, going back to our movie idea. If you've ever been to a movie screening, they will do these screenings sometimes as early as a year in advance of that movie. when it's still extremely raw. And they're getting genuine feedback. But here's the other thing that happens with it. If you've ever been to one of those, you know when that movie actually comes out, you rush to it. You want to go see it. And you're probably going to take 5 of your friends, even if you thought it wasn't very good, because you want to see the finished result. You want to see, did they take your input? How did it apply? And you kind of proudly say, well, I wrote on that form that they should do this, and look at, they did it. And it creates this kind of this, it's no longer just them and you, it's now us, right? You're part of it in some way. So creating that involvement, and there's a lot more detail I guess I didn't say that this is all based on a white paper that's been written called Making Change Stick, and so it certainly is available to you, and there's a lot more detail in it. Third one is understanding, and note that this third step is not about training. I mean, it includes training, but we purposely didn't call it training because this is really about creating this deep understanding of what's happening, why. Of bringing people on board so that they have a full understanding of exactly what's going on, how we got here, and what changes we're expecting to be made. And again, what's really important to understand here is that as you look across the span of the people you're impacting, you're not going to be impacting everyone in the same way. So that means the level of understanding that they need isn't the same, and you need to be aware of that, and you need to make sure that means that your effort to educate and create this understanding has to happen at multiple levels. That you can't treat everyone the same. You need to show respect for their needs and for where they stand in this process. And the second thing is you have to understand that people don't learn in the same way. That some people are visual learners and some are participatory, and we all have parts of that in us. So you need to create multiple mechanisms, and we like using kind of creative solutions of games and roadshows and different things that allow you to take the message to create this understanding across a lot of different spectrums. And then the final step here is adoption, or adoption monitoring and control. And this is really a combination of carrots and sticks. How do you ensure that once this change goes live, that it's actually being followed? And this is critical because those first days and weeks after the change is supposed to happen are the most fragile for it. Because if people don't see that there's a commitment, that management is looking and expecting these behavioral changes to actually occur, then they just feel like they can ignore them, and it just kind of, they go on. So you need to make sure that you're doing both. The carrot here is that you're giving them the tools they need to succeed in this transformation, whether that's additional training, whether it's roving support, whether it's whatever it is. Whatever they need to help ensure that they're successful, you're trying to set them up for success. But you also need to monitor. And so the stick part is the control. How are you going to monitor the behavior? How are these behaviors in fact changing? And are you seeing the results that you expect? And again, we're not. This isn't about beating people up. It's about giving them corrective guidance immediately at that point at which you're expecting behaviors to change. Because if they don't see that focus, then that communicates that it's really not that important to them. So, or to you, and therefore it shouldn't be to them. And so you've got to have that piece very actively engaged. And there's one other component that we're not going to really talk about, but it's the idea of building canaries in the coal mine, early warning signals. And there's a great story in the white paper about Van Halen's version of that, and it's actually a lot of fun. So I hope you get that and take a look. So as you go through this and you take this adoption strategy, how do you execute it? Well, the first thing is you got to have one, right? And this goes back to our core message, is that changing organizational and personal behavior requires deliberate action. So you can't wait till the end. You need to start at the beginning, and you need to plot out your course for how you're going to change those behaviors, right? If you wait till you've done all the process and all the technology, well, it's done. It's going to be too late to have an impact. So you have to start early, and you need to understand what that impact is going to be. We talked about creating understanding approaches that are matched to the impact. Well, that means you need to understand who you're impacting. What are the constituencies, and how are they going to be impacted? Because you need to show respect for the fact that you are affecting their lives, but you're not doing it just because. That you're doing it with a meaning, and that they have an important role to play in this. And as you go through that, one of two things, or a couple things are going to happen, is you're going to identify the ways that you can work with people to mitigate that impact and to help them participate in this. And you're also going to identify the barriers, the resistance to change, and where those are. And you probably will have come up with some of this in your focus groups as you've gone through that involvement stage. But once you have them, you need to have some creative approaches. And we've talked about, whether it's roadshows or games, or there's just a number of different things you can do, and it just really depends on what those barriers are and the culture of your organization. But the key thing is you can't just throw training at them and expect people to change. You need to be deliberate about understanding what those barriers are, and then be creative about ways that you can help overcome them. And the last step of the strategy here is that you need to execute early and often. This applies both to your adoption strategy. You need to start that early, and you need to consistently be working on an act path about how you're going to change behaviors. But it also means within the context of your initiative itself, is that if this initiative does not deliver anything for 9 months, it is going to lose so much momentum and so much steam from that initial buzz you're trying to create till the first time anyone sees anything out of it, that it's going to be really hard to drive home the point that this is important change. So you need to make sure that you're bringing change early in the cycle and that you repeat it on a basis. And this kind of paves the way that people get used to the fact that the organization is changing, that there is a constant state of change in the organization for the better, and they need to get on board. So as we kind of wrap this up, if you take only a few things away from what this is. The first is that your job here is to lead an effort. That you need to lead with the idea of transforming, and in order to do that, you need to take deliberate action that is focused on changing personal and organizational behavior. Cannot stress it enough. That deliberate action, that it is a key component of this effort, has to be there, and that is driven from leadership. And that you have to then take that to the next step of creating additional leaders. That the people that you bring into this effort, they must be empowered not only to help make decisions about what this program is going to be, but also to go out into the organization and carry that message and adapt it and adjust it and do whatever has to happen to make it take root. A key tool that you will have to do all this is, as we've talked about, is sharing the why. And why operates at two levels. There's the big why. So as we look at whatever your service improvement or transformation initiative is about, that's going to be some big vision. That vision is probably being driven at an executive level about either changes in the business or whatever it is, whatever is driving it. They need to understand the why. They need to understand the big picture. But they need to also understand the how does this affect them, what's in it for them, and what is their role in this, right? You need to bring it down to their level. They need to understand their personal why. And as they understand their personal why, and then you can demonstrate how the thing that you're asking them to change at that personal level and how they operate on a day-to-day basis is part of this package that when we connect all the dots, helps fulfill the big why, helps move the IT organization where it's trying to go. That's an incredibly powerful thing that will allow you to move the organization forward. Related to that is the idea that you have to share the credit. And honestly, this comes as a natural output of by sharing this why. As you start making the initiative, the improvement and the transformation about them, about the people that are actually doing the work day to day, then the credit naturally falls to them, because that's where it all comes to. And as you do that, then again, it creates that investment. It creates this idea that this is theirs, they own it, and therefore they have a responsibility to make sure that it works, and that where it doesn't work, they're going to raise it up, and they're going to bring it to whatever the structure that you have in place to execute against that. But they're going to be a part of that. They're not going to be just passive, sitting out there waiting to see what happens and hoping it fails. They're going to be invested in the outcome, and they want it to succeed, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are getting the credit for it. And the other outcome of that is that it actually makes it a lot of fun, because in the end, people want to be part of something big. They want to be a part of things that are changing for the better. And so when that becomes abundantly clear to them that change is coming, and that there's a commitment to it, and that they're in the middle of it, and they understand it, then they're having fun, and that makes it fun for you. And that needs to be one of the key messages to take away from this, is that you need to enjoy the ride. You need to enjoy going through this process with them. And that doesn't mean it's always going to be fun and always going to be easy. But by taking that attitude of that it is an enjoyable thing to help this organization, to help your organization transform and move through this process, that the rewards will be tremendous, that it's going to make it a very enjoyable process for you. So I hope that you are able to take some of these ideas and put them to use, and that you're able to really go and help transform your organization. So that's really what we had to cover today. We're going to answer a couple quick questions. Before we do that, I wanted to remind everybody of our next upcoming webinar. It is on August 11th 3 weeks from now at 12:15 p.m. Pacific, 3:15 Eastern. And it's entitled Creating a Learning Organization, Lessons from a Parrot Head. It's been given by one of our senior consultants, Bill Cunningham, who is the former leader of the IT Service Management Program at Yale University. And he's going to share some very fun experiences about his time at Jimmy Buffett concerts and how that is a model for a learning organization. It's going to be a fun presentation. I hope you join us for it. Again, it's August 11th at 12:15 p.m. Pacific, 3:15 Eastern. All right, we only have time for a couple quick questions, so let me just get through them. The first is someone asked about sharing the link to the TED India study. That it was referenced on the slides of India. We will post a link to our website, so please look for that. Next question is, I am a team lead, not a manager that can hire people. Do I need to be a manager or executive in my company to work? The answer is no. So clearly, the larger the scope of any transformation initiative, the bigger the executive support needs to be. But this applies, everything we've talked about applies just as equally within the context of the smallest team, really. Because the basic idea of taking your team, so let's say there are 6 of you, your team of 6, and that you're going to set charter a vision here of this is what we're trying to improve, here's what we're trying to fix. And you step through this entire process of saying we're going to bring a team together and we're going to do all the exact same things. Create awareness within your team of what you're trying to do. Create involvement. Go through the same process. It is very effective, and in fact, it's more intuitive in a smaller environment, and it's going to come very naturally. But going through this deliberate process of not being focused on just the process, but understanding what behaviors you have to change. The other thing is it is also something you can do on kind of a voluntary basis. So if you look at a problem that's maybe slightly bigger than just your team, but maybe it's 2 other teams that you have good relationships with the leads or the managers of those teams, where you voluntarily come together and say, you know what, we've got this problem we're going to solve. And it's between the 3 of us, we can get this done, between our 3 teams. And we're going to form a little working group and go through this. It applies just as well. So at the end of the day, this is all about how you change behavior and how you get people engaged in a process so that it becomes something that they own and engaged in, and that it breaks out of these ivory towers where we're just throwing process and tools over the wall and hoping they work. And it's really just about making change stick. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope that you guys have received some value from this presentation, and we look forward to having you at the next one. Thanks for joining.